Welcome to the channel. In this video we're going to have a look at how we can use the Databricks VS Code extension. Initially we're going to install the Visual Code extension for Databricks. Then we're going to configure it and have a look at what you can do with it. We will need to install some things on our local machine, set up a virtual environment and install something called Databricks Connect to make it fully functional. Then we will try to connect to a workspace, and we are going to connect to a cluster and try to execute some code. And finally we are going to look into different ways of working with this extension, how we can write and execute code either locally or on the clusters that's available through Databricks. As usual, most things Databricks are quite well documented, and this VS Code extension is also documented, and you can have a further look here on the official documentation. It kind of describes what the extension is, what you can use it for. So for instance, one thing we will look at later here is how we can use the VS Code to deploy our code into our Databricks workspaces using CI/CD patterns. We looked a little bit at CI/CD pipelines in the previous video, and in the upcoming videos we will also look in how to use Databricks asset bundles, and in particular how to use them in combination with development in the VS Code extension. Besides that, the documentation also describes how you can actually execute code in different ways from VS Code on your Databricks cluster or locally, and that's what we are going to mostly look at in this video, and then of course set up the extension to actually get connected. A prerequisite to work with Databricks VS Code extension is to actually have the Visual Studio Code program installed. You can Google it and you can download it from here. You can download it for your required operating system, and once you have it installed, it will look something like this. Go here on the left side, you choose Extension tab, click here, and then you search for the Databricks extension. We take the first one and we will install it. It also shows a quick guide here how to set it up, but we will go through those steps. Once the Databricks extension has been installed, we have a new tab here on the left hand side. So we can click here, and then we can configure the VS Code extension. So we can click here and create a new Databricks project. So let's click here. What you will initially need to do is to specify the workspace host. The way we find that is that you will go to your workspace here. So I go to my development workspace, and here I will go and copy the base URL from the workspace, and I will copy that in here. So I have already created it, but you can put in your new one. Then we click there. Then we need to basically connect to the workspace. You can do that in two different ways. Either you have a personal access token that you can store locally, or we can use OAuth. The good thing about OAuth is you don't need to store any credentials on your local machine, so we will go with that. So you can click there, and that will basically authorize to your workspace. I already have one created here, so I'm just going to choose the one I've already created. So that's the one I created. Then next we are asked where we want to have like our project code that we are going to synchronize with Databricks. So I have connected to our GitHub repository that we created in the previous tutorials. So I'm going to select that here. And then we are actually nudged by the extension to actually kind of set up what is called a Databricks asset bundle already. So let's try to go through the last steps here of the tutorial. So I'm just going to stick with the default Python template. I will give it a name like that, and then I will just let's try to take on some of these examples here. Yes. Okay, then it says, okay, your project has been created in the convg-ai directory. So I will go back here into my Explorer, and I had already connected to my repository on GitHub. So this is, for instance, the add notebook that we've been looking at before. And now by going through this like setup with the extension, it has automatically created this folder here called convg-ai, and it created a lot of things actually. This we will wait with looking into for another video. For now, we are going to have a look at actually our original notebook here, and how we can run that on our clusters in Databricks, and also how we can run it locally. If we go back into the extension here, Databricks, and let's see here. Okay, here. Okay, yes. Okay, so we just need to open the project that we just created in the Databricks extension, and okay, there we go. I go back into the extension tab here, and what is happening now is that we basically connect to the workspace. So now we are connected, and what we also can do is to basically to connect to a cluster on the workspace. So right now I have already created one cluster here, but you also have the option to create a new cluster. I will take my existing cluster. It's currently turned off, but actually from the IDE here we can also turn it off. So I click start cluster here. Since it's a normal cluster here, it will take a couple of minutes for it to start up. So before we move on with examples of how to use the VS Code extension, I want to make some data available in our Databricks workspace. The way we do that is to go to the catalog here. It gives a hierarchy here. It has a hierarchy where you initially in the first level is called a catalog. Then one catalog can have one or multiple schemas, and then a schema can have different types of objects such as tables, volumes, or models. We will try to create a simple table by importing some data manually. So I will click create table here, and then I have some data here I can drop in. So I just have a simple CSV file with some simple data. So we load that in to our Databricks table, and we can give it a name. Let's call it employee lab. We add it to this catalog and into the default schema. So this is the data, and we can click create table. And once the table has been created, we can look at some of the sample data from the workspace here. Okay, let's go back into VS Code. What we want to do now is to see if we can run our code interactively within our IDE. I have opened up our add notebook, but I have relocated the notebook into the source folder and then copy it into here. We still have our add function, but I have also added some code that is trying to load data from the data that we have just uploaded to our Databricks catalog. So initially what we need to do is to basically create a virtual environment. So there are multiple ways to do that. One way is to press down here, and then we can basically click create virtual environment. In order to create a virtual environment in Python, you need a Python interpreter installed in the first place. And then you can choose one to base our virtual environment on. So I choose to create a venv, and I use this as my base interpreter. And I will, and this is something that has been created from the VS Code extension once we set it up. So I will add the default requirements and click OK. This will set up the environment. Once the virtual environment has been set up, we can see that we have connected to it down here in the lower right corner. And we can also see down here in the lower left corner that the Databricks Connect has now been enabled. So if I try to run the cell here, then we can see if we can run the code. And it tells us that we need to install the IPy kernel package as well. So this is something related to actually executing the code interactively. So we will also install that. The IPy kernel has now been installed, and we can retry to run the cell. And there we have it. Runs the function definition, and then we actually call the function and we get the expected answer of 7. Now let's see if we can also run the second part here. So this is actually data that is located in the catalog of our Databricks workspace. So let's see if we can run that. And there we have it. So we actually sent this Spark command here and commit it to our cluster that we are connected to via our Databricks extension here. So this command to execute actually requires our cluster to be turned on. So under the hood, the cluster here fetches the data, and then it sends it back to us into our IDE. We have now seen the first way that we can interact with our Databricks workspace from our IDE. Next, we are going to see how we can also use the IDE to execute and start workflows in our Databricks workspace. The next thing we will try is to run our Databricks notebook as a workflow. The way we do that is to click here on the right side at the Databricks icon. We can click here and we can say run our notebook as a workflow. This basically means that we take all the code here and submit it as a workflow in Databricks. So let's press here. This will synchronize all the files from our repository into Databricks workspace. So you can see here, this is the information that we get. So while we are waiting for it to execute, let's try to go to our Databricks workspace, and we can go into the workspace folder, and I can go into my personal folder here, and a new folder has appeared. This .bundle. This actually started appearing already once we installed and connected our VS Code extension with a project that we started working on. So if we press into the .bundle, we can see here that we have different folders here according to the projects that we have created, and this is the one we are working on right now. So this is basically the repository files here that we have, and if I go into the source folder, and we can have a look at the app notebook. That is the notebook that we have been looking at so far. So this is basically the code that has just been resynchronized. So this is a direct way between the VS Code extension and Databricks. So this code here might not necessarily be the same version as the main branch, for instance, on GitHub. But if we go back to the VS Code here, then we can see that okay, our notebook has actually returned some output. So what we can see is it has prepended some code. This is some standard code that it always adds once it is converting something into a workflow. And then it runs the code here. So we get the result 7 again, and also we get the expected result from the data that we are loading. We can also click here on the task run ID. This will open up the run in our Databricks workspace on the job runs, where we also can see the output. You can also go here into the job runs, and then you can see here the jobs that we have submitted from the IDE. So this is this one here that we have just been running. We can click in on it here, and there we can also see and refine our output from the job run. All right, So time for a small recap about what we learned in this video here. So initially we figured out how to install the VS Code extension, and there were some prerequisites. You needed to install Visual Code if you didn't have it. You also needed to have a Python interpreter. With those two in hand, you could actually connect to the Databricks workspace, and you could set up a virtual environment, and that allowed you to enable Databricks Connect and run code locally on your machine. We saw how we could also upload data into our Databricks catalog, and how we could fetch that into our IDE by running code using Databricks Connect. Finally, we had a look at how we can also submit our entire notebook as a job into Databricks as a workflow. And we looked at how we can look at the results of such a workflow. So I hope you liked this video. In the next one, we are probably going to have a look at how these Databricks asset bundles works.